We've all experienced investing time and money into a book only to forget everything we read and find ourselves in the same place we started. But what's really stopping us from transforming our lives with what we read? Throughout my 15 years of teaching and business experience, I've discovered two life-changing principles that have led to the highest levels of academic and financial achievement for my students, teammates, and myself. The first of these principles is to read holistically, and the second principle is to read adaptively. Together, they result in what I call transformational reading, the ability to turn mere information into career growth, wealth, and the ability to serve at the highest levels. Years ago, when I was growing fast with my direct sales business and was jumping several income levels, I eventually got to a point where my business imploded. My teammates were suddenly quitting, my income started dropping, and I started to wonder what was wrong with me. Up to that point, I had read a few books on personal development. T. Harv Eker's Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, Robert Kiyosaki's Cash Flow Quadrant, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and others. But if I was so knowledgeable about personal growth, why was I still finding myself broke, unable to communicate properly, and lacking in my leadership ability? It was at that moment that I decided to completely shift my approach to reading books. Without realizing it at the time, I started to practice the principle of reading holistically. I discovered three distinct types of reading: experiential reading, informational reading, and actionable reading. You can think of these as feeling a book versus understanding a book versus using a book. All three have different roles in our personal and professional development, and in order to position ourselves to actually take action and get results from what we read, we have to focus on implementing all three at the appropriate times. All three of these work together to create life-changing results, so if you skip any of them, it'll likely be the reason you continue to struggle. First, let's talk about experiential reading. Some books we read simply to help us create a mood or feeling that drives us through our day. You know, when I look back, I realize that's exactly how I was reading the books I previously mentioned. Those books gave me inspiration and a daily push to stay focused and consistent, despite all the challenges, which was definitely a foundation for my initial income growth. So many people who discuss how to optimize our reading tell us we shouldn't just let a book we read wash over us, but I totally disagree. There is a role for this type of book. Sometimes we're down, need to just get in the right mindset after something disappointing happened, or need to give ourselves a sense of vision or hope. Experiential reading, reading with no specific intention of actually learning new information, helps us get the right kind of result needed at that specific point in time, which in my case was a better attitude, which helped me reframe my emotional challenges and lack of belief in myself. So then the goal of this type of reading is simple: mindset. My problem though was that I got stuck in experiential reading. Ask yourself, are you stuck here too? Experiential reading was the spark that lit the fire of motivation for me. But it was at that point that I started to realize the second type of reading I needed: informational reading, which was the fuel that kept that fire burning and growing. One reason I realized I wasn't able to influence my team and people around me effectively was because of my lack of knowledge. I used to go to networking events, fumble around trying to describe what I do, have them ask me things like, what are your margins and what's your value proposition? And I would just freeze up like a deer in headlights because I literally didn't know what those words meant. How could anyone truly take me seriously if I hadn't educated myself on the basics of industries outside of the business I was in, as well as simply the topic of business more generally? It was at that point I took an aggressive approach to reading about business. I read books about everything from franchising to international trading, struggled to understand the concepts, but I swore to myself I would never find myself in that same situation again. You see, gaining knowledge on more general topics, often topics that you wouldn't consider relevant to your personal growth, is an integral piece that's missing for you to have a solid foundation for taking action. When we gather general information related to our topic of interest or to topics of interest that even remotely relate to the goals we're pursuing, this information allows us to achieve two key transformations. One, we start to understand different viewpoints and perspectives. And two, we start to build our confidence from real knowledge rather than just from motivation. This second point, building our confidence from real knowledge, was especially important for me at that time because it did something for me that experiential reading couldn't accomplish in a million years. It gave me the courage to approach prospects I wouldn't have otherwise approached. It gave me the courage to set appointments I would have been too intimidated to set before. And it gave me the confidence that if I made a particular business decision, I was doing the right thing. And why? All because I had a framework of knowledge founded on facts, logic, and evidence to support the mindset I was building with the experiential reading I was engaging in. The goal of informational reading, then, can be summed up as critical thinking. And when we strengthen this aspect of our mind, we gain tremendous personal power. We go from simply believing to knowing. That's why even now I'm reviewing this book on decision theory. No, it's not what you would think of as a personal growth book or a business book, but isn't it though? Could closing yourself off to certain kinds of books or information be exactly what's holding you back from the kind of transformation you're looking for in your life? So just as mindset is the foundation for critical thinking, effective critical thinking is the foundation for the type of reading we all need to master, which is actionable reading. At a certain point in the process of rebuilding my business at that time, I started to realize I was lacking in certain skills. You see, I was and still am an introvert. Being around people and relating to people doesn't come naturally to me. It was something I needed to work on. It was clear I needed to hone certain skills, but how? That's when I started to focus on reading books with very specific results in mind. I wanted to get better at spotting problems in how I was building my team, so I read Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I wanted to improve my leadership style, so I read John Maxwell's The 5 Levels of Leadership. I wanted to improve my listening skills and how I related to people, so I read Vanessa Van Edwards' Captivate and Dave Kerpen's The Art of People. The key here was that I had a project I was already working on, namely my business, and I had goals with that project, namely to make a certain amount of money, and so it was a lot easier to implement what I was learning. You see, this might just be one of the reasons you find yourself unable or unmotivated to take action on what you read. How many times have you heard someone say, oh, this is such a great book, you should read it. You go ahead and read it, and then you agree, this is such a great book, there are 3 habits I can just implement right away, but then you implement nothing from it. I know that when this has happened to me, there has been a little voice in the back of my head saying, but I'm already so busy every day and have so many other things I'm doing. I don't want to add 3 more habits, especially if I can't be sure they're gonna be worth my time, and I have so many things I already need to prioritize. Have you ever had this conversation with yourself? Well, let's resolve this right now. Instead of choosing books based on simply what you think sounds interesting, work backwards first by either developing a project or simply identifying an important project you're already working on, and then select a book that matches the skill you need to level up on to achieve a certain goal with that project. This is a much better use of your time. If you're in corporate and trying to move up to a new position, identify the factors that are holding you back. Do you need to level up your communication skills? Do you need to improve your accounting skills? And if so, which ones? Be as specific as possible. And then match a book to that specific skill set or goal. The goal of this type of reading then is skill development. Once I started focusing on all 3 types of reading at the same time, my business started to bounce back from disaster. The mistake I made for so long, and that so many of us make, is reading only one of these types of books and thinking we'll get the results we want. As we've seen, mindset without skill development and critical thinking is just self-gratification. Critical thinking without mindset and skill development is simply intellectual amusement. And skill development without critical thinking and mindset is simply meaningless action. But if this is true that combining these 3 reading types will empower us to experience true transformation in our lives, then how do we seamlessly integrate these into our busy lives? Well, that brings us to our second game-changing principle: read adaptively. There are hours of video on YouTube discussing all sorts of reading hacks, from active recall to using visual tracers to eliminating subvocalization and so many more. But trying out all these hacks can feel overwhelming, and what's more, if we use all these hacks with all types of reading, we'll actually decrease the results we get from books. No one size fits all. The key is to learn when and how to use these hacks and how to turn them into effortless habits. Let's look at experiential reading. Recall our goal with these types of books, the development of the right mindset. With that in mind, you can take some light notes here or highlight specific quotes that made an impact on you, but it's not the top priority. Reading faster and getting through the text quickly is also not your top priority here, as forcing yourself to read faster through the text tends to defeat the purpose. For example, back when I was building my second business, a test prep agency in New York City, I was stuck to my office pretty much 24/7, and that was soul-sucking for me. It was then that a friend of mine suggested I read a classic book by Dr. Maxwell Maltz called Psychocybernetics, and it was truly transformational for me. But was it really worth me taking the time to make a Google Doc, adding the key points about it to a sheet, and coming back to review it? No. If you want to get the maximum impact on your outer life from these types of books, a better strategy is to have conversations with others on the insights you're gaining from it, and that's exactly what I did at the time. When I was able to get out of my office and attend training meetings with my team, I would share some of the principles I was learning with them, how I was implementing them, for example, doing certain visualization techniques, and then get their feedback on my thoughts. Instead of incorporating the ideas into a notebook, I incorporated them into my identity. Informational reading is a bit different though. Here, remember that our intent is to incorporate different perspectives to enhance our critical thinking skills. You can think of this almost as lifting weights to build muscle, except you're doing this for your brain. Here's where reading speed matters, so you'll want to use all the hacks you might have already heard, using your finger or other object to move through the text and stopping yourself from saying the words in your head as you read will instantly increase your reading speed. However, for this kind of book, you probably don't want to waste your time taking extensive notes. Some sticky notes, as well as making a short summary of main points every chapter, will probably be enough. Back when I was writing my first peer-reviewed academic book, I read literally hundreds of books and articles that would fall under the category of informational reading. Out of the long list of citations of the books and articles I read to write this book, there are so many more that aren't on this list that I simply read to give myself a bit more background on a topic, explore a particular perspective, or gain a general understanding. In these cases, I didn't need to read every single example of how to use Bayes' theorem, for example, or learn about every single paradox in decision theory. For certain pieces of information, I could simply add some sticky notes to the book, take a few notes here and there on key points, and finish the book fairly quickly with just the general understanding I was looking for. Finally, we want to take a look at actionable reading, which involves the goal of developing a concrete skill. With that in mind, your aim should be to read for speed, accuracy, and also retention. So you want to take 2 actions to achieve these. First, you'll use all of the reading techniques we covered for informational reading, but we'll include what's called the scanning method. What you're doing here is only partially reading, picking up words and phrases along the way that stick out to you, and when examples or stories are given in the text, picking only one of them to actually read for the purpose of comprehension, skipping over all the rest, and then immediately creating a plan to implement the information. For example, when I was working on developing my sales skills, one tip that stood out to me in Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, was replacing the phrase "I think" with "it seems" when making recommendations to people, creating a less polarizing dialogue. And this was something I could immediately apply to my next conversation with a prospect or a customer. My next step at that point was to immediately stop reading, get out my calendar, and schedule a time when I would either use this tip in a real situation or practice using this tip. If you don't schedule it in right away after you read it, chances are it won't happen. Because reading this way gives you a ton of speed you wouldn't otherwise have had. It saves you a lot of time we can use for the 3 most important tasks here. 1, taking notes, 2, scheduling in review of those notes, and 3, scheduling implementation of key points. This is vital here for actually transforming your life with what you learn. Don't think you have to read all 3 book types all at once in order to get a result. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have time for that. Instead, simply make sure you have a balance of these book types lined up on your reading list. Take the pressure off yourself that you have to somehow read perfectly. If you're reading an informational book and halfway through it, something happens in your life, you might suddenly find you need an experiential book more. Give yourself permission to temporarily stop in the middle and switch to the book you need most at that time. At the end of the day, it's not about reading fast. It's about reading for transformation. I I challenge you to take action on at least 1 to 2 points you learned from this video. And if you want to keep learning how to use critical thinking to take control of your life, then be sure to watch this next video.